What if the first marks pressed into clay were never intended to be a beginning, but the final effort to hold on to a world that was already slipping into the long shadows of the past? Perhaps the sky we see tonight is no longer the sky that watched over the first builders, but a shifting mark of time that witnessed the great waters that scrubbed the world clean. We often speak of the written word as a milestone, yet it might be better understood as a way to catch the last echoes of a memory before it vanished forever into the silence. Deep within the sun-scorched stretches of the southern plains, where the air is heavy and the sand keeps the secrets of 1,000 lifetimes, the ruins of the first cities sit like ghosts. Beneath the broken brick and the ground polished by the desert wind, there are countless clay fragments. Each one bears the rhythmic and angled indentations of hands that moved with a strange and practiced confidence. These ancient fingers worked as if they were not learning a craft, but were recording a truth they had always known. These marks look like the tracks of birds caught in a drying riverbed, repeating in patterns so complex and so perfect that they once held the entire weight of a civilization. The clay itself is a patient witness. It is a material pulled from the riverbanks and smoothed by human hands to receive a message that was intended to last forever. When we hold these fragments in the mind, we are touching a physical bridge that spans thousands of years of human experience. There is a stillness in these objects, a sense of permanence that demands we slow our thoughts and listen to what they have to say. These markings are what we call cuneiform, and together they represent texts inscribed on clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia. What truly stays with the mind is not merely how old these tablets are, but the unwavering certainty of their tone. They do not feel like the clumsy experiments of a people who were just learning how to communicate through symbols. Instead, they read like a ledger that was already halfway finished before the stylus ever touched the damp surface. If you are listening to this in the quiet hours of the night, enjoying the video as your thoughts begin to calm, consider subscribing to Legends of the Dawn. It helps these stories live on and ensures they reach others who are seeking the same space to rest. And if you would like uninterrupted sleep, longer versions, or editions accompanied by gentle background sounds such as rain, distant thunder, or a low fire, those are available to you through the membership. Now, let us leave the noise of the world behind and return together to an era where the very spirit of memory was being carved into the ground. The discovery of this world emerged slowly from the sun-baked earth and the shifting sands of the ancient mounds. Within rooms preserved by the very dust of the ages, excavators broke through the heavy soil. An excavation at the ancient site of Nineveh uncovered the library of a great king named Ashurbanipal. It was here that an immense cache of clay tablets was brought back into the light. Later, at the ancient city of Nippur, explorers discovered thousands of clay tablets containing forgotten texts. The tablets were stacked with an almost obsessive level of care. Each was no larger than the palm of a hand, yet each was covered in a dense and masterfully executed script. These carefully pressed pieces of river clay served as the books of the ancient world. Ancient libraries housed vast collections of these texts. Great kings even boasted that they had mastered the scribal arts and could read stone inscriptions from before the Great Flood. To understand the peace and the patience of these tablets, we must look at the men who wrote them. The ancient Sumerian school was a center for scribal training, where students learned to write cuneiform and memorized linguistic classifications. Within its thick mud brick walls, the air was always cool and still. The texts reveal that the scribal art was not viewed merely as a human invention. It was seen as a profound divine gift, handed down from the quiet heavens. The ancient scribes did not view themselves as inventors. They saw themselves strictly as restorers who were copying and preserving the sacred traditions of the distant past. It was believed that the blueprints of reality, the divine decrees known as the May, governed the pattern of the universe. By pressing their reed styluses into the soft, damp clay, the scribes were keeping the May alive for future generations. These quiet scholars understood that empires inevitably fall. They viewed their ultimate duty as ensuring the cultural memory and the blueprints of civilization survived the cyclical rise and fall of human eras. This incredible dedication leaves us with a lingering, beautiful mystery. We know that this wedge-shaped script evolved gradually from simpler pictures over many centuries. Yet, the spoken language behind it presents a striking anomaly. The Sumerian spoken tongue remains a true language isolate. It has absolutely no known linguistic ancestors or relatives in any language family on Earth, living or dead. We are left to ponder how this highly complex language system suddenly appeared in the archaeological record, with no clear linguistic relatives. It is as if the language itself was a sudden gift, leaving its exact spoken origins an enduring historical mystery. The scribes protected this isolated memory with their lives. From these very blueprints, the first true urban centers would slowly rise from the damp earth. We will now follow this knowledge out of the quiet scribal school, moving into the fading light of dusk, to witness the rapid and mysterious rise of the first great city. As the shadows lengthen across the ancient plains, we can picture the marshlands giving way to massive walls of stone. We can imagine the steady, quiet breathing of the people, resting in their newly built homes. The same calm night that settled over them is settling over us now, guiding us deeper into the mysteries of the past and deeper into a peaceful sleep. The horizon of Uruk at dusk reveals the soft shadows of massive temples rising quietly from the marshlands. The setting sun casts a gentle glow over the drying mud and the slow-moving currents of the great river. A deep and meditative silence settles over the sprawling landscape as the ancient world prepares for the coming night. The scent of wet river silt mingles heavily, blending with the low smoke of burning oil lamps. From the quiet darkness of the plains emerged a settlement, one that would change the turning gears of human history forever. During the early dynastic period, this quiet gathering of homes experienced an unprecedented expansion that spread far across the earth. The sheer scale of this vast urban spread emerged like a sudden crystallization of human effort, stretching across the marshy plains. The heavy clay structures expanded outward, growing until they covered nearly 1,000 acres of the surrounding territory. This massive concentration of life operated as a perfectly calibrated machine, functioning with massive and monumental proportions. Within the heavy walls of this immense city lived generations of people, souls who moved to the quiet and rhythmic pulse of their temples. The slow turning of the seasons dictated the planting of grain, followed by the gentle harvesting of the fertile earth. A vast network of canals acted as the life-giving arteries, sustaining this tremendous and urban organism. The administration of such a vast territory required a profound level of organization, a system that had never before been seen beneath the stars. Research suggests a lingering mystery regarding how these ancient minds so quickly mastered the professional planning necessary to maintain this scale. The quiet streets and sprawling agricultural sectors were carefully designed, built to keep the heavy gears of society turning peacefully. Certain interpretations propose that the sudden mastery of this complex script is a mirror, reflecting the shockingly rapid expansion of their physical city. The vast population of Uruk moved through their days, walking beneath the watchful and silent gaze of their protective deities. The temple priests organized the labor of the thousands of souls, the people who dug the canals and shaped the heavy bricks. Every action was a carefully planned component, a vital gear in a massive, perfectly balanced machine. The quiet mystery remains, inviting us to wonder how this profound administrative source code was developed in such a short span of time. The sheer weight of their architecture required an immense understanding of geometry, a grasp of physical force needed to remain standing. The city rose from the mud with a profound confidence, possessing a grace that still echoes faintly through the desert sands. The ancient builders sought to embed the harmonic resonance of the heavens, placing it directly into the physical foundations of their world. This grand urban design required an underlying system. The builders relied upon a sacred and quiet geometry, using it to lift their grand visions from the mud of the riverbank. This precision invites the mind to drift, fading into the profound mathematical source code that made their reality possible. The clay fragments they leave behind reveal a profoundly advanced numerical system, a framework that gently challenges our modern understanding of the ancient mind. These heavy pieces of river mud carry the weight of profound thought, preserving algorithms that seem impossibly advanced for the quiet dawn of human history. As we trace the intricate patterns pressed into the clay, we uncover a world where numbers were used to peacefully map the very fabric of reality. The early scribes developed a brilliant framework based on the number 60, featuring a highly complex and positional notation. They used this mathematical language to translate the vast and sweeping movements of the stars, shaping them into careful angles and lines pressed into the earth. This complex base 60 system remains a remarkably advanced architecture, one that perfectly integrates fractions into a seamless and peaceful whole. We are left to gently ponder how such a monumental intellectual leap occurred, appearing so early in the human story. Research suggests that this highly advanced geometric framework appears to predate our modern mathematical evolution, separated by vast and silent ages. It does not look like the clumsy counting of a young society, but rather operates as a fully realized and perfectly calibrated science. Certain interpretations propose a mystery in how such a sophisticated system was developed, leaving no clear evolutionary trail behind in the cooling earth. Every line and angle was a deliberate act of mapping the invisible forces, the quiet gears that governed the turning world. To the ancient minds, this profound mathematical source code was not a fragile or human invention. The scribes who tended the tablet house viewed their knowledge as a sacred and divine gift, handed down peacefully from the great beyond. The ancient records state that this cosmic wisdom belonged to a powerful water god, the deity known as Enki. Enki was revered deeply as the lord of calculation and the gentle and patient master of wisdom. He dwelled in the sweet and silent waters of the deep abyss, a peaceful realm which the ancient people called the great Abzu. From his tranquil home in the dark waters, he guarded the sacred instructions, the blueprints that maintained the delicate and ancient balance of the world. These divine blueprints were known to the ancients as the May, serving as the hidden and mathematical architecture of reality. They acted as a great operating system, governing the hidden laws of the universe and the gentle flow of civilization. The May contained the mathematical formulas for everything, from the building of temples to the quiet music of the spheres. The myths describe how Enki sailed across the marshlands in his quiet boat, distributing the May to the growing cities. He brought the knowledge of the plough and the secrets of the loom, offering them to a humanity that was just learning to shape the earth. It was a time of immense and rapid learning, guided by the steady hand of the water god and his divine geometry. The legends tell us that Enki used this sacred mathematics to organize the earth, setting the great mechanisms of society into peaceful motion. He measured the land, carefully aligning the heavy bricks of the very first shrines. Through the power of the May, he brought a calming order to the wilderness, allowing humanity to flourish in the quiet valleys. One famous clay artifact, held quietly in a modern collection, shows the beautifully precise geometry of a carved square. Etched softly across its diagonal is a mathematical calculation so accurate it mirrors our modern understanding of complex roots. It is a quiet testament to a people who understood the hidden and numerical architecture of the physical world. To map the sprawling heavens, these ancient astronomers divided the dark sky into perfectly equal and repeating segments. This circular geometry allowed them to track the slow and majestic movements of the stars, charting their paths across the vast and silent expanse. It was a method of observing the night that brought a comforting and predictable order to the overwhelming vastness of space. The temple priests stood upon their towering and staged ziggurats, reading the silent messages of the turning heavens. They could calculate the paths of wandering planets and predict the darkening of the moon, doing so with a peaceful and unwavering certainty. The heavy walls of their observatories became the great memory banks, storing the observations of an ancient world searching for cosmic harmony. This incredible devotion to symmetry created a society, one where the earthly and the divine were peacefully intertwined. The builders used these divine formulas so their massive temples would perfectly mirror the flawless harmony of the stars. Every brick was laid in accordance with a sacred proportion, tethering the mud of the riverbank to the distant sky. The mathematical language of the May was not a simple method of counting on fingers, but a profound and cosmic framework. It was an intellectual structure so perfect and so brilliantly conceived that it effortlessly divided the quiet hours of the day. It is an ancient system of measurement that still echoes softly, influencing how we divide our own time and our own space today. The young scribes dedicated their lives to preserving this order, completing their work one quiet and careful wedge at a time. They learned to calculate the boundaries of the agricultural fields, along with the vast volume of the city granaries. Their steady and meditative work ensured the heavy gears of the urban machine remained peaceful, turning smoothly so all were provided for. The ancient city operated as a perfectly tuned instrument, humming softly beneath the blanket of the desert night. The water god Enki watched over this grand design, observing quietly from the depths of his subterranean realm. He ensured that the rivers flowed gently within their banks and that the canals nourished the drying earth. The steady rotation of the seasons reflected the calm and eternal logic of his divine blueprints. This profound connection to the turning of the stars eventually shaped the way the ancients viewed human leadership. The celestial mechanics observed by the early astronomers were soon mapped directly, overlaying the slow rhythms of the heavens onto the reigns of their earthly leaders. The profound mathematics of the sky provided a steady and majestic rhythm, guiding the peaceful passing of human generations. This cyclical understanding of time brings us to another lingering mystery, resting deeply within the ancient and silent clay records. The texts speak of legendary rulers who governed the first cities, existing long before the great waters scrubbed the world clean. The The clay tablets record these ancient kings ruling for impossible spans of time, lengths that seem to mathematically mirror the vast cycles of the stars. These incredibly long eras lead us to gently ponder the true nature of kingship, specifically in the quiet dawn of human civilization. We must quietly ask ourselves if these rulers were mortal men, or if their reigns were a way to record the slow wobble of the earth. We will soon explore the legends of these ancient monarchs, drifting into the golden age they peacefully oversaw. But for now, we can leave the scholars of the tablet house, returning them to their quiet and rhythmic calculations. The oil lamps flicker softly against the clay as the heavy silence of the night embraces the sleeping city. You can allow your thoughts to slow down, releasing the burdens of the day into the dark air. The ancient world is resting safely within its mathematical design, balanced perfectly upon the turning earth. We can simply close our eyes, drifting endlessly into the quiet geometry of the sleeping stars. As the long shadows of dusk stretch across a quiet museum room, a single ray of fading light illuminates a four-sided and deeply ancient clay prism. This silent artifact is known to modern scholars as the Weld-Blundell prism, preserving the echoes of an era that existed long before the great waters washed the earth. The ancient scribes who pressed their wedges into this heavy clay did not view the concept of human leadership as a fragile or mortal invention. To these early minds, the heavy burden of kingship was a divine technology, a profound system of order that literally descended from the turning heavens. It was a sacred mechanism designed to tether the chaotic earth to the predictable stars, ensuring the great engine of civilization turned smoothly and peacefully. The records state that this divine and heavy crown first settled upon Eridu, a city resting softly at the very edge of the Sweetwater abyss. In this sacred place, the first mortal king took his seat upon a heavy throne, guided by the quiet wisdom of the water god, the deity known as Enki. The king was a living conduit for the divine blueprints, known as the May, the cosmic algorithms that maintained the delicate and beautiful balance of reality. The ancient king list records that this first ruler was named Alulim, a leader who oversaw the great marshlands with a steady and calming hand. The ancient texts claim that he governed his people in a state of perfect harmony, sitting upon his throne for an impossible span of tens of thousands of years. He watched the slow turning of the constellations from his quiet temple, measuring the vastness of time with a patient and unwavering gaze. He was eventually followed by other incredibly long-lived monarchs, kings like Enmenluana, who ruled the ancient world for massive and peaceful eras. These rulers are said to have governed their quiet domains for periods that stretched the human imagination into the deep and silent cosmic void. These colossal and majestic reigns reflect a profound human fascination with the immense and patient cycles of celestial and cosmic time. The scribes who recorded these massive spans of time did not view them as simple errors, or as the fanciful exaggerations of a wandering storyteller. They recorded these enormous figures with the exact same careful and meditative precision that they used to tally their grain and their precious livestock. To them, these ancient kings were a historical reality, a lineage of rulers who possessed an endurance that our modern minds can scarcely comprehend. Certain interpretations propose a stunning and mathematical alignment, resting quietly within these impossible reigns. The lengths of time these kings ruled seem to mathematically mirror the great wobble of the earth, an astronomical cycle known as the precession of the equinoxes. This massive celestial rhythm takes tens of thousands of years to complete, as the constellations slowly and silently shift their positions across the turning and starry night sky. The slow and deliberate procession of the equinoxes means that the starry background of the rising sun changes, drifting over thousands of years. The ancient scholars of the plains would have noticed this grand and sweeping shift, mapping the wandering stars as they slipped gracefully across the horizon. This majestic rotation provided an overarching framework, a celestial clock that ticked slowly behind the veil of the ancient night. This celestial cycle operates like a massive and complex clockwork gear, grinding slowly in the dark. The ancient astronomers carefully observed this subtle shift, recording the mathematical differences over vast and quiet generations. They recognized that their earthly world was tethered to this cosmic machine, a system that required perfect and harmonic measurement. It is possible that these ancient and impossibly long reigns were actually a brilliant and beautiful method of recording the vast turning of the heavens. By tracking the slow movement of the stars, the ancient astronomers may have encoded their cosmic knowledge, embedding it directly into the lifespans of their legendary kings. This means the early kings were not simply mortal rulers, but living markers of deep and ancient time, breathing in unison with the universe. This deep astronomical knowledge was believed to be a vital component of the May, the divine blueprints of reality that governed the sleeping universe. The kings of the ancient world were the earthly guardians of these decrees, ensuring that human society perfectly mirrored the flawless harmony of the stars. Under their long and peaceful guidance, the early cities flourished, growing quietly in the warm light of the southern plains. The clay prism tells us that when a king finally returned to the earth, the heavenly kingship would gently and peacefully move to another great city. It traveled slowly across the flat alluvial plains, bringing periods of immense growth and prosperity to each new and reaching capital. This slow migration of power created a vast network of thriving urban centers, all united by a shared and deeply sacred history. The texts record that when the kingship moved across the plains, it descended upon these new capitals with the full and resonant blessing of the gods. Cities like Batibira and Larak rose to immense and quiet prominence, their heavy stone walls glowing softly in the bright light of the ancient sun. The people of these sprawling cities flourished under the divine protection, building massive temples that reached ever closer to the turning sky. The ancient lists tell us that the kingship eventually moved to the city of Sippar, a place known deeply as the seat of the great sun god. Here the rulers were taught the quiet and sacred secrets of divination, learning to read the will of the heavens in the soft and silent signs. The people of Sippar maintained this profound connection to the stars, passing their celestial and mathematical wisdom down through the fading generations. The great kingship came to rest in the city of Shuruppak, the last capital to rule before the heavy rains began to fall. This city was situated peacefully on the flat and fertile plains, where the rivers provided a constant flow of life-giving and sweet water. It was within these very mud-brick walls that the final antediluvian monarch would face the ultimate test of human and mortal endurance. This sweeping antediluvian era was remembered as a time of immense peace, when humanity lived in constant and rhythmic harmony with the divine forces of the earth. The air was filled with the quiet rustle of the reeds and the steady breathing of a people who were secure and comfortable in their world. There was no fear of sudden destruction or violent change, for the ancient kings maintained a perfect, calming cosmic balance. The daily lives of the people were woven directly into this mathematical structure, finding deep comfort in the predictable movements of the earth. They planted their grain and harvested their crops in a timeless, unbroken cycle of natural abundance. The passing of thousands of years felt like the gentle turning of a single endless day. The rulers of this age were said to be guided by wise counselors, quiet sages who emerged from the deep waters to teach the gentle arts of civilization. These figures walked peacefully alongside the early kings, ensuring that the divine may were properly understood and carefully applied. Together they created a highly engineered and balanced society, one that was perfectly aligned with the slow and majestic rhythms of the natural world. The grand architecture of their cities mirrored this immense and cosmic stability, anchoring the society firmly to the earth. Every canal and mud brick wall was designed to reflect the divine order, creating a physical manifestation of the turning heavens. The ancient world became a quiet and perfect reflection, catching the starlight like a still, dark pool of water. But the incredibly long reigns of this golden age were eventually brought to a sudden and silent halt. The great gears of the ancient world shifted with a heavy groan as the rivers began to swell beyond their muddy banks. The profound legacy of these eternal kings was buried completely, slipping beneath a deep and heavy blanket of water. The slow progression of the early kings was interrupted by a profound and sudden shift in the cosmos. Explorers digging deep beneath the ruins of the ancient city of discovered the physical memory of this devastation. Beneath the lively debris of the earliest towns, they struck a massive and sterile layer of pure river clay. This deep and silent band of silt abruptly interrupted the steady and mechanical flow of human history. It was a layer so thick and clean that it could only have been deposited by a catastrophic inundation. Similar deposits of waterborne earth were found beneath other great cities, sealing away the secrets of the very first builders in a dark slumber. The excavators revealed a sharp, undeniable boundary dividing the world before the flood from the world after. The ancient clay records do not describe this devastation as a random natural disaster, but as a deliberate reset engineered by the highest authorities of heaven. When the scribes pressed their wedges into the damp earth, they recorded a time long before the deluge, when the lesser gods were forced to bear the heavy toil of the earth. These junior deities, known as the Igigi, were tasked with digging the massive canals and maintaining the complex irrigation systems that kept the world in balance. For many centuries they shouldered this strenuous labor until the grinding burden of their work became entirely too much to bear. The lesser gods burned their tools in the middle of the night, surrounding the great temple of the storm god Enlil, to demand a permanent release from their endless slavery. The supreme god Anu acknowledged that the grievances of the laborers were legitimate, and the brilliant water god Enki proposed a profound solution. Enki suggested the creation of a new being to carry the heavy burden of the gods and maintain the complex machinery of the earth. The birth goddess Mami was assigned the task of shaping this new humanity from the damp clay of the plains. To give this new creature the intelligence required to civilize the world, Enki instructed the assembly to use the blood and spirit of a slain god. The divine essence was carefully mixed with the river mud, creating a biological machine designed to keep the earth perfectly ordered and highly productive. This new workforce was called the Lulu, and they were deployed across the flat landscape to ensure the sacred systems of agriculture never ground to a halt. The ancient texts tell us that the spirit of the slain deity remained within humanity as a constant rhythmic drumbeat in their chests. This heartbeat served as a quiet reminder of their divine origins and their heavy obligations to the sky. The human engine functioned with a staggering efficiency, expanding its reach across the valleys and multiplying its numbers with every passing generation. As the early cities expanded across the plains, The sheer volume of human activity became a deafening roar that reached the highest heavens. The ancient texts describe this sound as a physical clamor known as rigmu, causing the earth to bellow like a wild beast. The storm god Enlil, who governed the wind and the air, grew increasingly frustrated by this constant noise. He looked down upon the sprawling settlements, realizing that the human experiment had grown entirely too loud and chaotic. His quiet rest was shattered by the accumulated din of human activity and the unending hum of civilization operating at its absolute capacity. This loss of sleep was a serious problem for the rulers of the sky, as the deities required absolute stillness to maintain their own peaceful rest. Enlil viewed this disturbance not as a moral failure, but as a practical engineering problem involving a system that was running entirely too hot. He decided to forcefully cool the machine commanding the god of plague to release a terrible sickness upon the land to thin the noisy herds. A heavy silence fell across the land for a time, but the human machine proved to be incredibly resilient and adaptive. The population soon recovered and multiplied, causing the loud and chaotic clamor to return to the ears of the sky gods. Enlil then sent a severe drought and a bitter famine starving the cities in a desperate attempt to quiet the unending roar of progress. Yet the brilliant water god Enki, who guarded the master blueprints of the universe known as the May, repeatedly intervened to save his creations. Enki instructed the people to focus their offerings on specific deities, effectively bypassing the plagues and allowing the population to endlessly rebound. Enlil finally reached a cold and terminal calculation, deciding that he would not merely reduce the population, but completely erase it. The supreme rulers convened in the darkness of the inner sanctum, forcing the entire divine assembly to swear a strict oath of total destruction. The gods agreed to unleash a massive deluge as an absolute and final solution to the problem of the overwhelming sound. The decree was meant to be an absolute secret, hidden carefully from the ears of mortal men. Enki understood that if humanity was entirely wiped out, the highly advanced system of civilization would be lost to the dark waters. Bound by a strict oath not to speak to any human, the water god found a clever solution within the constraints of the law. He traveled to the ancient city of Shuruppak, approaching a wall of woven reeds that formed the outer boundary of the home of a devout king named Ziusudra. The deity did not address the man directly, but instead pressed his face against the vibrating reeds and spoke to the structure itself. Enki commanded the reed wall to listen closely, instructing the king to tear down his house and build a massive boat. He told the listening ruler to abandon all worldly possessions and focus entirely on saving the fundamental essence of life. The water god warned the king that the impending deluge would be absolute, taking the form of a violent surge designed to wash away the sprawling cities forever. He told the ruler to weave thick ropes of palm fiber and to gather the vast knowledge of his people into the hold. The king listened carefully to the rustling of the reeds, preparing to build a massive sanctuary that could withstand the crushing weight of the abyss. The instructions provided by Enki were highly technical, demanding a sturdy vessel built with equal length and width to mirror the cosmic geometry. Survival became a matter of pure engineering as the king sealed the heavy wooden hull with massive amounts of boiling pitch. He coated both the inside and the outside of the great craft with the black glass of the earth, ensuring it was perfectly watertight. He loaded the cubic vessel with his family and the animals alongside the skilled craftsmen who held the rescued knowledge of the world. Dark clouds began to gather on the distant horizon as the powerful forces of nature were mobilized for total destruction. The people of the ancient world went about their daily labor, completely unaware of the massive shadow falling over their fragile homes. The secret of the divine assembly had been perfectly kept, ensuring that no door would be left open for a desperate escape. Once the heavy doors were sealed shut from the outside, the ancient world waited in quiet anticipation for the impending storm. As the final days of the Golden Age ticked quietly away, the king led the animals of the earth into the dark and waiting hold. He loaded the heavy stones of the ancient world alongside the delicate and irreplaceable formulas of the sacred May. He gathered his family and his most skilled craftsmen, pulling the heavy wooden doors tightly shut against the cooling air of the twilight. Outside the walls of the sealed capsule, the turning heavens began to darken with a terrifying and unnatural speed. The sky turned the color of bruised iron, and the great dikes of the earth simply gave way, unable to hold back the immense pressure of the deep. The record indicates the flood was not merely a storm of rain, but a catastrophic structural failure of the natural plumbing of the earth. The gods of the assembly raised their flaming torches, lighting up the land with a terrifying brightness as the chaotic forces of nature were unleashed. The storm god Adad thundered in the black clouds, while the god of the underworld pulled out the mooring posts of the earth. The warrior god Ninurta caused the ancient dikes to give way as violent winds and a roaring deluge overwhelmed the flat plains. Water came from below and above, simultaneously erasing the accumulated work of generations in a matter of days. The noise of humanity stopped immediately, replaced by the terrifying roar of the tempest that raged for many long days and dark nights. The ancient scribes tell us that the gods themselves retreated cowering like dogs against the outer walls of heaven. They were overwhelmed by the totality of the destruction they had unleashed, realizing entirely too late that they had broken the very mechanism of the world. The mother goddess Nintu wept bitterly for her creations, lamenting that her people now filled the sea like the spawn of cold fish. The sprawling fields and complex irrigation canals were entirely erased, replaced by a vast and stagnant ocean of thick brown water. The subterranean waters burst upward from the cracked earth, joining the torrential rains falling heavily from the broken sky. The ancient cities were swallowed completely, disappearing beneath the roaring tide that swept away the endless noise of human creation. The great engine of civilization ground to a sudden halt, submerged beneath a vast and dark ocean that stretched infinitely in every direction. Inside the massive capsule, the passengers could only feel a violent and sudden lurch as the buoyant craft was lifted from the earth. The tremendous hydrological forces battered the bitumen shell, but the flexible and perfectly circular design easily deflected the chaotic energy of the storm. The craft spun slowly in the dark and churning waters, a tiny pocket of order surviving within a vast and terrifying sea of absolute destruction. The noise of the storm outside was a deafening roar, a sound of pure and unchecked chaos, erasing the structured world. The passengers huddled closely together in the dark, listening to the heavy waves crashing violently against their protective shell. Yet the woven palm fibers held tight, flexing and groaning under the immense pressure, but never yielding to the hungry abyss. For many long days and deeply silent nights, the great vessel rocked upon the surface of a drowned and forgotten world. The people inside tended to the restless animals, waiting patiently in the dim light of their flickering oil lamps. They were the lonely custodians of human memory, carrying the profound mathematics of the past safely across the dark expanse of the Great Reset. Outside the bitumen walls, the angry gods wept with regret as they looked down upon the absolute and watery silence of the earth. Without the heavy labor of their human servants, the divine beings began to suffer from a deep and unyielding hunger. The cosmic authorities realized the terrible cost of their flood, longing for the rhythmic hum of the very machine they had so completely destroyed. The dark and stagnant waters began to slowly recede, draining back into the deep reservoirs of the ancient earth. A soft breeze drifted across the endless ocean, carrying the faint, hopeful promise of dry land returning to the light. The long and terrifying night had finally passed, giving way to the gentle warmth of a quiet and peaceful dawn. Eventually, the terrifying roar of the wind began to pale, fading slowly into a gentle and rhythmic breathing against the hull. The massive capsule came to a sudden and heavy rest, grinding softly against the submerged peak of a distant and silent mountain. The violent motion of the sea calmed into a smooth and glassy stillness, signaling that the immense cooling of the earthly machine was finally complete. When the wind finally paled and the heavy rain ceased, the surviving king opened a small vent in his floating vessel. The sun god Utu came forth, spreading his warm light across a landscape that had forgotten its name. The world had been returned to pure and featureless clay, acting as a massive blank slate for a new era to begin. The roaring machine of human civilization had been silenced, leaving behind a profound absolute stillness that stretched to the distant horizon. The surviving ruler stepped out onto the damp earth and immediately lit a fire to offer a quiet sacrifice to the rulers of the sky. The starving gods, who had grown incredibly hungry in the long silence, gathered eagerly around the sweet smoke of the offering, like insects drawn to light. They realized that without the endless toil of the human workers, the beautiful gardens of the gods would ultimately wither and die. Enlil arrived in a fury to find that his cleansing had failed, but Enki defended the survival of the king as the essential seed of the new world. A compromise was reached in the divine assembly, allowing for a cautious restart of the great human engine. The gods agreed to rebuild the world, but with permanent limiting factors built directly into the biological design of the new humanity. The lifespans of men were strictly limited, and natural checks were engineered to ensure the population would never again grow too large. This was a calculated adjustment to ensure the noise would never again grow loud enough to disturb the peaceful sleep of the heavens. The wheel of civilization was finally turning again, but it was designed to run much cooler and constrained by a careful divine plan. The heroic king who survived the surge was granted eternal life and transported to a distant paradise where the sun rises. He left behind a scoured and empty plain, waiting patiently for his descendants to carry forward the heavy record of the boundary. Slowly and carefully, the surviving generations rebuilt from memory, applying the sacred patterns of the May that had navigated the terrifying surge. The survivors did not invent a new way of life, but simply restarted a massive machine that had temporarily stalled in the mud. They lived in the long shadow of a world that was already mastered, moving through streets that had been designed with a deep understanding of the earth. Every measurement taken in the new cities was a careful thread being woven back into the original and unbroken web of existence. The deep layer of clean river clay remains as a sharp physical boundary dividing the simple tools of the past from the sudden genius of the future. The destructive waters scoured the earth clean, creating a quiet sanctuary where a highly advanced system could finally take root. The world would confidently move forward, but it would move with the deep and lasting knowledge that the gods preferred the quiet. The sky is clear, and the slow turning of the stars resumes its quiet watch over the recovering world. From the deep and dark waters of the southern Gulf, a mysterious presence begins to softly stir, rising beneath the gentle waves. The ancient records tell us that humanity did not have to rebuild its shattered world entirely alone, but was given a profound and divine assistance. Deep within the archives of the ancient world, stone reliefs cast in flickering lamplight reveal the imposing figures of strange and magnificent beings. These silent guardians are known in the earliest traditions as the Apkallu, or the 7 great sages of the primeval earth. They act as a profound and peaceful bridge connecting the fragile minds of mortal men to the vast and eternal wisdom of the gods. The ancient lore states that these mysterious figures emerged slowly from the Abzu, the deep and sweet water abyss that rests beneath the earth. They walked peacefully onto the muddy shores, bringing the sacred blueprints of the May back into the warming light of the ancient sun. Their arrival marked the quiet dawn of a new era, restoring the broken mechanisms of the scoured and silent world. The first of these magnificent sages was known as Adapa, a being of immense and quiet intellect who understood the hidden laws of the turning universe. The legends say he rose from the sea at the break of day, stepping softly onto the wet sand to greet the exhausted and grateful survivors. He carried the heavy weight of divine knowledge, ready to gently guide humanity out of the dark and silent wilderness. Adapa and his fellow sages spent their daylight hours walking peacefully among the people, teaching them the lost arts of survival and complex creation. They moved with a calm and deliberate grace, their voices humming with the rhythmic and mathematical perfection of the turning heavens. Yet when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, these quiet teachers would silently return to the cool and dark embrace of the sea. Through the long and starry nights they rested in the submerged temples of Enki, the water god who had saved the fragile and human seed. They were not entirely of the earthly realm, but operated as divine emissaries sent to reawaken the sleeping gears of human society. Their patient and meditative instruction allowed the devastated cities to rise once again from the mud, reaching slowly toward the eternal sky. The ancient clay tablets record that these 7 sages taught the early people, giving them the profound and careful art of writing. They showed the scribes how to press their delicate wedge-shaped marks into the soft river clay, capturing the fleeting spoken word in a permanent and unchanging form. This sacred gift of memory ensured that the slow accumulation of human wisdom would never again be washed away, slipping into the dark waters. They also brought forth the knowledge of complex mathematics, returning the brilliant base 60 numerical system to the quiet and meditative tablet houses. The sages taught the builders how to lay the heavy limestone bricks, using sacred geometry to safely balance the massive weight of their reaching temples. The ancient world was carefully reconstructed, engineered to perfectly mirror the flawless and silent harmony of the stars above. The Apkallu instructed the people in the quiet arts of agriculture, showing them how to coax life from the drying mud of the alluvial plains. They mapped the slow movements of the constellations, teaching the priests to read the turning heavens to predict the changing of the seasons. Every aspect of civilized life was gently handed back to humanity, restored completely through the patient guidance of these aquatic and mysterious masters. The sacred decrees of the May were carefully unpacked, establishing the complex laws that governed human behavior and peaceful social order. The sages ensured that the great engine of civilization would run smoothly, humming with a peaceful and rhythmic precision. The surviving mortals listened with a deep and meditative reverence, eager to rebuild a world that pleased the watchful and sleeping gods. The memory of these 7 beings is preserved deeply within ancient incantation texts, spells like those known as the Bit Maseri, These heavy clay documents list the names of the sages, associating each one with the legendary kings who governed the earliest, quiet cities. They were remembered as the great and patient counselors, ensuring that the earthly rulers remained perfectly aligned with the divine, cosmic plan. The records indicate that these beings were not simply human scholars, but something far more profound and mysterious. They possessed a nature that bridged the gap between the mortal clay and the eternal watery depths of the primeval abyss. Their presence in the ancient texts invites us to gently ponder the true origins of human knowledge and the silent forces that shape our distant history. Certain interpretations propose that the Apkallu represent a deep cultural mythology, an elegant way to explain the sudden, brilliant spark of human innovation. The sudden mastery of architecture and mathematics required an explanation that stretched beyond the simple and slow evolution of wandering tribes. To the ancient minds, such profound leaps in understanding could only arrive from a realm that existed outside the boundaries of mortal time. We can picture the early scribes pressing their wedges into the clay, carefully copying the names of these 7 masters. They preserved this lineage with a deep and quiet devotion, ensuring that the memory of their teachers would endure the passing of the silent ages. The heavy walls of the temple libraries became a sanctuary for this ancient truth, resting safely in the cool shadows of the earth. As we examine the surviving stone reliefs, a stunning and beautiful visual mystery begins to slowly wash over the modern mind. The ancient artisans carved the figures of the Apkallu with a careful precision. These intricate carvings lead us to gently wonder about the true nature of these mysterious and waterborne teachers. We must quietly ask ourselves if these fish suits were simply the ceremonial garments worn by human priests performing the sacred rites of the water god. Perhaps the early religious leaders donned these heavy and scaled cloaks to visually embody the divine wisdom flowing from the deep abyss. The priests of Eridu may have walked through the quiet streets in this aquatic attire, serving as living reminders of the great and terrifying survival. By wearing the skins of the sea, they tethered the daily life of the city to the profound and watery origins of their civilization. It is a beautiful and comforting thought, imagining human scholars honoring the sweet waters that had both destroyed and saved their world. Yet the ancient texts invite us to let our thoughts drift even deeper, exploring a more profound and otherworldly possibility. The mythology suggests that these beings literally emerged from the ocean, acting as completely non-human entities sent to guide a fragile and recovering Earth. We can gently ponder if these legends hold the distant echo of a truth that our modern minds can no longer fully grasp. Whether they were devoted human priests in ritual garb or mythical emissaries rising from the ancient tides, their legacy remains absolute and unbroken. They provided the steady and calming hand that humanity desperately needed to rise from the mud of the Great Reset. The 7 sages acted as the great stabilizers, calming the terrified survivors and setting the heavy gears of the world back into a peaceful and rhythmic motion. The surviving families gather closely around the quiet fires of the newly washed earth, listening intently to the soft teachings of the 7 aquatic sages. The people look up at the heavy and turning stars, wondering silently why the gods had chosen to spare them from the devastating waters. The mysterious Apkallu answer this quiet plea, revealing the profound and ancient secret of why the human form was originally engineered. The sages explain that long before the Great Deluge, the ancient world operated under a completely different and deeply burdensome system of divine labor. The lower tier of deities known as the Igigi were forced to bear the grueling work of the earth, shaping the raw and muddy plains into a habitable domain. These lesser gods were the original architects of the land, tasked with digging the massive canals and clearing the heavy watercourses of the ancient rivers. For 40 long and exhausting years, the Igigi carried the heavy clay baskets upon their shoulders, working tirelessly beneath the hot, unyielding sun. They carved the deep channels of the great rivers, ensuring that the sweet waters flowed perfectly to sustain the luxurious lives of the senior gods. The great Anunnaki rested peacefully in their high and shaded temples, entirely removed from the dirty and exhausting toil of the lower plains. The sheer scale of this divine landscaping project was entirely unprecedented, requiring the lesser gods to carve deep, endless trenches through the solid rock. The work was absolutely unbearable, and the exhausted deities finally reached the very limits of their divine and immortal endurance. The ancient records tell us that the Igigi threw their heavy tools into the fire, watching the flames consume the instruments of their endless slavery. They marched together in the dead of the night, surrounding the great and towering temple of the storm god Enlil, to demand a permanent release from their servitude. The heavy doors of the temple were quickly locked against the angry mob, and the divine vizier hurriedly awoke the sleeping and terrified Enlil. The sky gods looked down upon the massive crowd of divine workers, realizing that the great, turning engine of the world was on the brink of total collapse. The supreme assembly of the heavens was thrown into a deep, profound chaos, searching desperately for a way to appease the rebellious workers without stopping the agricultural machine. The great storm god Enlil paced anxiously within the heavy walls of his sanctuary, listening to the roaring chants of the striking gods outside his door. He called upon the supreme ruler Anu and the wise water god Enki, begging them to bring a peaceful end to the terrifying, unprecedented divine uprising. The rulers of the sky debated quietly in the dark, knowing that if the canals were not maintained, the life-giving waters would cease and the earthly gardens would completely wither. It was in this moment of cosmic panic that the brilliant water god Enki stepped forward, offering a radical and highly technical solution. He suggested that they manufacture a brand new biological machine, a substitute laborer designed specifically to carry the heavy yoke of the gods. This new creation would be bound to the earth, built to dig the canals and harvest the grain so that the divine beings could return to their quiet, peaceful slumber. Enki summoned the great birth goddess Ninmah, bringing her to the sweet and silent waters of his deep and subterranean abyss. The ancient texts describe a fascinating process that reads less like a magical creation and more like a systematic and methodical laboratory experiment. The two deities took the soft clay of the riverbank, attempting to shape it into a perfectly calibrated vessel capable of intelligent and obedient labor. They determined that the soft and mortal clay alone was simply not enough, requiring a powerful and divine catalyst to ignite the spark of true consciousness. The early builders of the world needed a creature that could understand the complex instructions of the gods and perfectly execute the sacred blueprints of the May. To safely manage the complex and mathematical geometry of the fields, this new worker would need to fully comprehend the divine and turning order of the cosmos. The divine assembly selected a rebel god named Wela, a deity who possessed the profound and deep intelligence needed for this new earthly vessel. The ancient scribes recorded that this god was quietly slain in the assembly, and his blood was carefully collected to be mixed with the heavy and wet mud of the riverbank. This divine essence acted as the ultimate binding agent, fusing the immortal spirit of the heavens directly into the fragile and mortal clay of the earth. By weaving his powerful and divine blood into the muddy earth, the gods ensured that humanity would forever possess a tireless and reaching ambition. This brilliant and biological compromise perfectly bridged the massive gap between the eternal heavens and the fragile and dying mud of the alluvial plains. The birth goddess carried this divine mixture in her womb, nurturing the biological seed until the very first humans drew their breath in the quiet dawn. The resulting creation was called the Lulu, a masterpiece of biological engineering designed exclusively to operate the massive and agricultural machinery of the plains. The ancient texts tell us that the spirit of the slain deity remained permanently trapped within the human chest, echoing softly as the rhythmic drumbeat of the pulse. This steady and beating heart served as a permanent reminder of their divine origins and their heavy obligations to the sleeping sky. The early humans were immediately deployed across the flat landscape, taking up the heavy wooden baskets and the digging tools that the Ijiji had so angrily abandoned. They worked the rich soil so the great gods could finally rest in the cool and quiet shadows of their reaching temples. The earthly human engine functioned with a staggering and beautiful efficiency, expanding its reach across the valleys and multiplying its numbers with every passing generation. The people planted the grain and tended the sheep, utterly unaware that their growing and massive population would eventually produce the deafening noise that brought about the Great Reset. The 7 sages finished their quiet story, watching as the flickering light of the fire dances softly across the faces of the exhausted and listening survivors. The people now deeply understand the heavy burden of their own existence, accepting their sacred duty to maintain the beautiful and cosmic harmony of the stars. They recognize that their survival was not a random accident, but a calculated preservation of the only workforce capable of keeping the divine and earthly machine in perfect balance. The heavy weight of this origin story settles peacefully over the camp, anchoring the fragile human minds to the deep and eternal turning of the heavens. Under the quiet guidance of the Apkallu, the ancient and legendary cities began to slowly rise again, building upward from the scoured plains. The foundations of Eridu and Uruk were laid with a meditative precision, anchoring the newly washed earth to the predictable turning of the sky. The massive ziggurats reached upward, serving as quiet mountains of clay that connected the human realm to the distant stars. The sages ensured that the new temples were built according to the flawless geometric proportions contained within the sacred May. Every mud brick was shaped and placed with a deep reverence, creating a physical harmony that mirrored the peaceful, cosmic order. The world was being carefully engineered to run quietly, avoiding the chaotic noise that had previously disturbed the slumber of the gods. The surviving human population grew slowly and deliberately, guided by the measured wisdom of their 7 counselors. The frantic clamor of the old world was replaced by a gentle, rhythmic hum of a society operating in perfect and careful balance. The rivers were channeled into new and quiet canals, bringing life-giving water to the fields without overwhelming the delicate banks. The ancient texts tell us that the Apkallu eventually completed their monumental task, finishing the quiet restoration of the earthly machine. Their divine instructions were firmly embedded into the minds of the temple priests, and the laws of the universe were safely pressed into the clay. The great engine of human history was turning smoothly once again, powered by the profound mathematics of the deep abyss. With their sacred duty fulfilled, the legends claim that the 7 sages slowly retreated back, returning to the vast and silent waters. They walked peacefully into the sweet abyss, disappearing beneath the gentle waves of the sea from which they had first quietly emerged. They left behind a thriving and mathematically perfect world, resting safely in the warm light of the southern sun. The memory of their quiet presence lingered in the minds of the people, woven deeply into the fabric of their daily lives. The scribes continued to honor the sages in their incantations, calling upon their ancient wisdom to ward off the dark and unseen forces. The image of the fish-cloaked master became a permanent symbol of protection, carved softly into the heavy stones of their palaces. The knowledge brought by the Apkallu allowed the new generations of humanity to flourish, growing with a quiet, profound confidence. They no longer lived in fear of a sudden and watery doom, for they possessed the divine source code needed to maintain the peaceful, cosmic balance. The earthly world had been successfully rebooted, running on a highly advanced operating system that promised a long and enduring stability. We are left to marvel at the brilliant narrative architecture that the ancient minds constructed, creating a story to explain their own sudden genius. The lore of the seven sages provided a comforting and unified origin for all of human culture, tying every earthly achievement to the divine and watery abyss. It is a testament to a people who recognized that their civilization was a fragile gift, requiring constant, careful preservation. The story of the Apkallu gently reminds us that true wisdom is often born, rising from the darkest and deepest of waters. The catastrophic cooling of the earthly machine gave way to a brilliant and enlightened renaissance, guided by the silent teachers of the deep. The ancient world had survived its greatest test, emerging from the wet clay with a renewed and beautiful purpose. As the great cities expanded their quiet reach across the plains, a new and fascinating chapter of human development began. The ancient builders sought to bring the earth closer to the heavens, constructing massive and staged towers known as ziggurats. These artificial mountains were built with solid brickwork and heavy bitumen, crowned at their very summits by quiet and sacred temples. The temple priests stood upon these towering platforms in the cool night air, reading the silent messages of the turning and starry sky. They tracked the slow and majestic movements of the cosmos, mapping the visible paths of the wandering planets across the dark expanse. The early astronomers divided the night into careful and equal segments, creating a great band of constellations that mirrored the turning Earth. They watched the moon pass through these heavenly stations, moving peacefully through the heavy and silent darkness of the ancient world. The ancient observers recorded the shapes of the divine animals, mapping the bright stars of the mighty bull of heaven. They tracked the true shepherd of the sky and the great twins, following their predictable and comforting paths across the turning night. The heavy scorpion and the leaping goatfish maintained their silent watch, guarding the deep and eternal rhythm of the cosmic wheel. Every careful observation was carried down from the towering terraces, brought safely into the quiet shadows of the sprawling tablet house. The weary astronomers handed their vast and sweeping knowledge to the scribes, the dedicated keepers of the human and cosmic memory. In the deep stillness of the mud-brick rooms, the overwhelming vastness of space was gently pressed into the soft river clay. The scribes of the ancient world dedicated their entire lives to this heavy task, working softly by the flickering, golden light of oil lamps. The young students were guided by the strict discipline of the school fathers, the master teachers who oversaw the quiet and rigorous academies. They were assisted patiently by the big brothers of the tablet house, ensuring that every delicate wedge was placed with absolute and perfect precision. They were not only mapping the vast and silent geometry of the stars, but also capturing the gentle and predictable rhythms of the human heart. The ancient teachers gathered the quiet wisdom of the passing generations, pressing it into the earth so it would never be lost or forgotten. The clay tablets reveal a profound and intimate understanding of human nature, preserving simple truths that still echo softly in the modern mind. The young scholars learned the simple truth that a sweet word is a friend to everybody, smoothing the heavy frictions of daily life. The clay records state that a loving heart builds a peaceful home, and a hating heart destroys the quiet foundations of the house. They taught their young students that friendship may only last for a single day, while the deep bonds of kinship will endure forever. They knew that the harsh desert canteen is the very life of a man, and the heavy shoe is his protective eye against the earth. The ancient wisdom claimed that a wife is the future of a man, and his son will always serve as his quiet and enduring refuge. The ancient teachers noted that working hand to hand builds the house of a man, while turning stomach to stomach will surely destroy it. The scribes wrote that the man who possesses much silver may be happy, and the man who harvests much grain may be glad. Yet they also knew that the humble man who has nothing is the only one who can easily and peacefully sleep. The ancient scholars who tended these vast and quiet archives never viewed themselves as the brilliant inventors of their own highly advanced culture. They understood their heavy burden as a sacred and profound duty, serving as the humble restorers of a deeply ancient and divine past. The scribes believed they were simply copying the sacred blueprints of reality, the hidden and majestic algorithms known as the May. They knew that these divine instructions had been handed down peacefully, brought forth from the sweet waters of the deep abyss by the water god Enki. The scribes worked with a deep and meditative reverence, ensuring that the flawless harmony of the universe remained unbroken across the turning generations. This profound devotion to the ancient source code brought a deep, calming order, a system that perfectly balanced the earthly and the divine. Their steady and careful work ensured that the spark of civilization could survive, resting peacefully in the dark until it was needed once again. Research suggests the ancient people did not see dreams as accidents of the mind, but as profound messages sent from the deep and silent parts of the universe. They believed these visions were a direct communication from the divine, offering quiet guidance for the waking world, connecting the inner world of the sleeping soul to the great and mathematical design of the heavens above. In the ancient city of Lagash, the records indicate the pious ruler Gudea lay down to sleep and saw a divine figure revealing a temple rising with absolute and mathematical precision. He did not question this profound vision, but instead he shaped the heavy mud bricks and raised the towering walls exactly as the sacred dream had commanded. This monumental effort served to safely anchor the celestial patterns of the starry sky directly into the soft, cooling mud of the earth. This magnificent achievement was carefully pressed into heavy clay cylinders, remaining safely preserved in the dark earth for over 4,000 years. It stands today as a quiet and beautiful testimony to a distant time when the path of a human life was guided gently by the whispers of the night. The exact same stars that the priests watched from their towering ziggurats still sparkle in the deep and freezing expanse. The cooling clay of the broken walls slowly surrenders the heavy heat of the day as the ancient earth continues its patient and rhythmic motion through the void. You are a living part of these quiet stories now, serving as a peaceful witness to the same long memory that the dedicated scribes sought to save from the drifting sands. The deep solidarity of the ages remains completely unbroken, For the very same mysteries that kept the ancient watcher awake on the temple roof are moving softly through your own resting mind. There is a profound peace in knowing that you are never alone in your wandering, and that the steady pulse of the first cities still beats quietly within the way you measure your passing days. You are a true heir to this ancient inheritance, standing peacefully on the dark shore of a vast cosmic ocean that has no end. The heavy work of the waking world is finally finished, allowing you to drift safely into a soft and restorative silence. The cool air settles gently over the long shadows, keeping the profound secrets of the clay entirely safe beneath the protective weight of the earth. The turning stars will continue their eternal watch, and the great rivers will continue their slow and patient flow. The cosmic memories of the ancients will remain perfectly secure, held gently and forever in the quiet hands of time.